capture our imagination. They shape our hopes. They shape how we live. So let me tell you a very old story. It's not in the Bible, but the people who wrote the Bible knew the story better than they wanted to. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, before the world was made, the gods lived on their mountain. But they weren't happy. They were afraid. See, there was a great monster, Tiamat, the chaos monster. Tiamat was so fierce and strong he could smash everything to smithereens. Someone had to deal with Tiamat, but even the gods were terrified of it. So finally they got together and they came to the great warrior god Marduk and pleaded with him to go to war against Tiamat and save us. All right, I'll fight Tiamat on one condition, he said. You must make me your king. So, sure, they agreed. Marduk fought the chaos monster, and in a great bloody slaughter, he killed it and split it in half like a fish. And with one half, Marduk created the sky, and with the other half, he created the earth. And then later on, human beings were created to be the slaves of the gods, to grow their food and serve them and do all the messy chores the gods didn't want to do. This is a story of the Babylonians, a proud and cruel nation who built a big empire and conquered our ancestors, the people of Israel. What does this story say about life? Well, it's pretty clear, isn't it? For one thing, you always have to be afraid of chaos. Chaos is always about to break out. You always have to worry that things are going to fall apart. But the way to deal with chaos is to use violence to defeat it. Beat down anything that feels like a threat. So those who are best at being violent create the world we live in. Violence lies at the very heart of reality. Not only that, the violent ones have the right to rule. They have dominion over the world. They are its natural masters, and human beings are made to be the slaves of the rulers, the masters. They must toil to provide a happy life for the gods and the people that the gods like the Babylonians, and especially the king of Babylon. This is the kind of story that you tell to justify your violence and your theft, to explain why you have a right to bust into other people's lands, burn down their temples, take their stuff, and be in charge. That's why you have the right to beat other people up. That's just how the world is. Sorry, sweetheart, get used to it. And violent empires of every age use their own version of this story to explain why it's just fine and okay for them to be vicious. Our ancestors heard this story because they were living as exiles in Babylon at the time. And what they said was, no, that's not how it is. That's a lie. And they told our story instead. Our story goes like this. Our God is not afraid of anything. Nothing terrifies our God. What he wants to do is to build a lovely world. But instead of killing a monster and filleting its body, our God just speaks. Let there be light. And there's light. Step by step, He calmly speaks into being a lovely world, an orderly, abundant universe. And at every step he says, that's so good. The world is solid and firm. It's not going to fall apart because God's will sustains it every moment. And when God made humans, he didn't make us to be slaves. He made us in his image with his dignity as his helpers, his caretakers for this lovely world. And he gave dominion not to the strongest and most violent, but to all human beings together. He didn't order us to grow food for him because he doesn't need us to. Instead, he planted a garden for us to live in and take care of. He made it our home and said, go ahead, eat. Just leave that tree over there alone, will you? The climax of our story is that God kicks back on the seventh day and just enjoys life with his children in his world. Of course, we know what came next. We fouled it all up, right? And our God did consider wiping the whole thing out. That's what the flood is about. But he said, no, I won't do that. I will remain faithful to my word. I won't give up on this. Yes, it's flawed, but it's still lovely, and it's mine, and I love it. I'm going to work with this thing until I finally get it the way I want it to be. It will be a world where my children and I can live together in peace. And instead of killing each other, people will live together in peace too. And so how does he do this? He gathered us as his people. We've been around a long time, folks. We go back 4,000 years. The Babylonians are gone. The only people who talk about them are the history teachers that irritate your children in school. We're still here. He gathered us as his people to tell this story and show the world what God is like. And when we become slaves to hostile powers, as we so often do, he frees us. And he gives us a peaceful, respectful way of life. In the Old Testament, it was his law. And in the world that we live in, it is the Spirit of Jesus who speaks to us every day. And he brings us under his kingdom. And he constantly opposes the violence of empire. Now, I know there's a lot of violence in the Bible. I'm aware of that. But I just told you our core story about how the world works. It's not a world that is always on the brink of chaos unless some thug pounds the world and brings order. Some people do believe that. Mel Gibson does. But our Bible says no. That's wrong. Our world is built for peace, by peace, and God will hold it together. And this is the vision that underlies this beautiful Old Testament lesson today. In the latter days, God will come to earth, and there will be a place where heaven and earth come together. In the Old Testament, it was the temple in Jerusalem. We know it as the life of Jesus, true God and true human, where heaven and earth become one. And he'll show us who God is and what God does and what God wants. And instead of running away, this time people will crowd to where God is and say, we want some of that because that's a better way of being human. And since weapons are no longer needed, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore. And from last week, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall dwell with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. They will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. We live by dreams. Some dream of conquest and wealth and empire and victory over their enemies. Give me our dream every time. People call you unrealistic. They say when you live this dream of peace, oh, you're a hippie. No, I've studied a lot about war. And I don't find well over 100 million war dead in the 20th century practical or realistic. I don't see trillions of dollars of destruction realistic. I find it sick. I don't see the prospect of global annihilation as realistic. I find it to be demonic madness. It is not the vision God has given us to guide our lives by. We are given a vision of peace. And as we wait for God to bring peace, how do we live into that dream? How do we live in anticipation of His work? Well, how about this? When we see people acting like thugs, doing whatever they please to beat their enemies and win every time, we call them out. No. But more to the point, we learn the art of forgiveness. We learn the art of reconciliation, bringing people together. We work for a world where even the least are respected, so that they don't become enraged. Where everyone can flourish. Everyone can flourish. And where everyone can be healed when they're hurt. And we're willing to expend the money and the effort and the love to find where the hurt people are and get them healed so that they do not rise up in anger. A world where we do not return evil for evil, and we do all this in God's great name. The church is called to be a different kind of community. One that shows in modest and imperfect ways, but genuine ways, the kind of world God is striving to create. And when we do this, we prepare not only ourselves, but we prepare